The day my parents threw me and my newborn twins out of their house, it was raining so hard I could barely see the driveway. I was 27 years old. My husband had been dead for only 17 days. And I was holding two babies who hadn't even been alive for a full month. I wish I could tell you that strangers were cruel. I wish I could tell you that life was unfair because of people who didn't know me. But the people who hurt me the most were my own family. My own parents. The people who were supposed to protect me. The people who were supposed to love me. Instead, they looked at me standing on their front porch with two newborns and decided I was a burden. What happened after that changed my life forever. And years later, when the same people who abandoned me watched me accept a $120 million check in front of hundreds of people, they finally understood what they had thrown away. My name is Emily Carter, and this is the story of how losing everything gave me the life I never imagined. Before everything fell apart, my life was simple. Not perfect, but happy. I was married to a man named Ryan. Ryan wasn't rich. He wasn't famous. But he was the kindest person I'd ever known. He made me laugh when I wanted to cry. He believed in me when nobody else did. Most importantly, he loved me exactly as I was. When we found out I was pregnant with twins, he cried. Actual tears. I laughed at him for weeks. He didn't care. He was already planning baseball games, birthday parties, and college funds. He talked about the future constantly. And maybe that's why losing him hurt so much. Because we had a future. Or at least we thought we did. Everything changed one Tuesday afternoon. Ryan was driving home from work. A distracted truck driver ran a red light. The accident was over in seconds. By the time doctors reached him, there was nothing they could do. I still remember the police officer standing at my door. The way his face looked. The way my stomach dropped before he even spoke. Part of me already knew. Somewhere deep inside. I knew. The next few weeks felt like a nightmare. The funeral. The paperwork. The endless tears. And through all of it, I was heavily pregnant. 3 weeks later, I gave birth to twin boys. Noah and Ethan. The happiest and saddest day of my life. Because Ryan never got to meet them. He never got to hold them. Never got to hear their first cries. Every time I looked at them, I saw pieces of him. His eyes. His smile. His stubborn little expressions. It broke my heart. After the hospital bills arrived, reality hit hard. Ryan had life insurance. But not much. Most of our savings had gone toward medical expenses during my pregnancy. Within a few months, I was struggling. Desperately struggling. The apartment lease was ending. The bills kept growing. The babies needed everything. Formula, diapers, medicine. I was exhausted. Scared. Alone. Finally, I did something I never thought I'd have to do. I called my parents. Growing up, my younger sister Jessica had always been the favorite. Everyone knew it. Jessica got new cars. I got hand-me-downs. Jessica got vacations. I got lectures about responsibility. Still, they were my parents. And I believed that when things became serious enough, family would step up. I was wrong. Very wrong. When I arrived at their house carrying my twins, my mother barely looked at the babies. Instead, she looked annoyed, as though I'd interrupted her day. My father wasn't much better. We sat at the kitchen table. I explained everything. The financial situation. The babies. The lease ending. My voice shook the entire time. Finally, I asked, "Can we stay here for a little while? Just until I get back on my feet?" Silence. My mother exchanged a look with my father. Then she sighed. The kind of sigh people use when discussing a problem. Not a daughter. A problem. Emily. Immediately I knew. I knew before she finished. We don't think that's a good idea. My heart stopped. What? Dad folded his arms. You need to figure things out yourself. I stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. I just lost my husband. We know. I have newborn twins. We know. Then how can you say that? Mom looked irritated. Because Jessica is living here right now. Of course she was. Jessica had moved back home after quitting another job, the fourth one in 2 years. Yet somehow there was room for her. Just not for me. There's plenty of space. Mom's expression hardened. That's not the point. Then Jessica walked into the kitchen, wearing expensive clothes, holding a coffee she'd probably bought with money my parents gave her. She glanced at me and rolled her eyes. Honestly rolled her eyes. Mom, please don't let her move in. The room went silent. I stared at her. You can't be serious. She shrugged. Those babies cry all night. My hands tightened around Noah. For a second, I couldn't speak. I kept waiting for my parents to correct her, to defend me, to say something. Anything. Instead, Dad nodded. We've made our decision. The betrayal hit harder than Ryan's funeral. Harder than the accident. Harder than anything. Because grief from tragedy is painful. But rejection from family feels personal. I stood slowly, holding my children, trying not to cry, trying not to break down in front of people who clearly didn't care. Then my mother said something I'll never forget. Maybe this is a sign you need to become more independent. Independent. 17 days after burying my husband, with newborn twins in my arms. Independent. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I realized something. My parents weren't helping Jessica because she needed it. They were helping her because they wanted to, and they weren't rejecting me because they couldn't help. They were rejecting me because they chose to. The realization hurt more than anything. I picked up the diaper bag, adjusted the babies, and walked toward the door. Nobody stopped me. Nobody apologized. Nobody changed their mind. Then, as I reached the porch, my father spoke. Good luck. 2 words. That's all. Good luck. The door closed behind me, and suddenly I was standing in the rain, holding 2 newborns, with nowhere to go, no home, no plan, no idea what came next. I sat in my car and cried until I couldn't breathe. Then my phone rang. The caller ID surprised me. It was Ryan's mother, my mother-in-law, Linda. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I should. The moment I picked up, she asked one question. Emily, where are you? I couldn't speak. I just cried. For several seconds she listened. Then her voice became firm, protective, almost angry. Stay where you are. I wiped my eyes. Why? Because the next words she said would completely change my future. Because if your parents won't take care of Ryan's family, she paused, then added, I will. And at that moment, I had no idea that the people who weren't related to me by blood were about to become the family I always needed. I didn't realize how close I was to completely falling apart until someone finally showed me kindness. That someone wasn't my mother. It wasn't my father. It wasn't my sister. It was my mother-in-law, Linda, the woman who had just lost her only son, the woman who was grieving just as much as I was. Yet somehow she still found room in her heart for me and my babies. An hour after her phone call, I pulled into her driveway. The rain hadn't stopped. Neither had my tears. The moment Linda opened the front door, she didn't ask questions. She didn't lecture me. She didn't tell me to be stronger. She simply wrapped her arms around me and said something I desperately needed to hear. You're home. Home. One word. But after everything that had happened, it meant everything. The moment we stepped inside, Ryan's father, George, walked over and gently took Noah from my arms. He smiled down at his grandson. Then he kissed his forehead. I've got you, little man. My chest tightened, because this was what family was supposed to look like. Not rejection, not judgment, support, love, protection. That night, for the first time since Ryan died, I slept for more than 3 hours. Not because life was easier, but because I wasn't carrying everything alone anymore. Over the next few months, Linda and George became my lifeline. Linda helped with feedings. George watched the boys when I needed sleep. Neither of them ever made me feel like a burden. Not once. Meanwhile, my own parents barely called. Weeks passed, then months. Sometimes I'd receive a text, usually something generic, nothing meaningful, nothing supportive, nothing that acknowledged what they'd done. Jessica, however, remained exactly the same. Every family gathering became another opportunity for her to remind everyone how much better her life supposedly was. And my parents encouraged it. One afternoon, I made the mistake of attending my cousin Rachel's baby shower. Linda suggested I go. Maybe it'll help. I wanted to believe she was right. I wanted to believe things could improve. Instead, it became one of the most humiliating days of my life. The moment I walked into the venue, I felt the stares. People whispered, not loudly, but enough. Enough for me to notice. Enough to make me uncomfortable. Then I saw Jessica, wearing a designer outfit, holding court in the center of the room like a celebrity. The moment she spotted me, a smile appeared on her face. Not a kind smile. The other kind. The dangerous kind. The kind people wear when they think they've already won. For a while, I avoided her. Focused on Rachel. Focused on being polite. Focused on surviving. Then Jessica decided to perform. Because that's what she always did. She needed an audience. And unfortunately, she found one. During lunch, someone asked how I was doing. A simple question. An innocent question. Before I could answer, Jessica laughed. Actually laughed. Oh, Emily's doing great. Several people looked confused. Jessica continued. She found new parents. The room became quiet. My face burned. Jessica. But she wasn't finished. She lives with her in-laws now. A few awkward chuckles spread through the room. Jessica smiled wider. Imagine being almost 30 and still depending on someone else. My heart sank. The cruelty wasn't even hidden anymore. Several relatives laughed nervously. Others looked uncomfortable. Nobody stopped her. Nobody defended me. Just like always. Then Jessica delivered the final blow. Maybe if she'd planned her life better, she wouldn't need charity. The room went silent. Completely silent. Every eye turned toward me. Waiting. Watching. Judging. For a second, I couldn't breathe. My husband was dead. I was raising twins alone. And my own sister was mocking me for accepting help from people who loved me. The worst part? My mother was sitting 3 seats away. She heard every word and said nothing. Not one word. That hurt more than Jessica's insult. Because silence is agreement when someone needs defending. I stood up, picked up my purse, and prepared to leave. Then something unexpected happened. Rachel's grandmother stood. 82 years old. Tiny. Sweet. Normally quiet. She looked directly at Jessica, then said, "Your sister buried her husband and raises 2 babies every day." The room froze. The old woman pointed her finger. "You should be ashamed of yourself." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Jessica's face turned red. For once, she had no comeback. I left before anything else happened, but the damage remained. That night, I cried in the shower so nobody would hear. Because no matter how strong I tried to be, rejection still hurt, especially from people who were supposed to love me. Months became years. Slowly, life stabilized. I found work, started freelancing online, saved every dollar I could. The twins grew. Noah became curious about everything. Ethan became fearless. Every smile they gave me made the hard days worth surviving. Then life hit me again. This time from a direction I never expected. George suffered a heart attack. The call came just before midnight. By the time we reached the hospital, doctors were already working on him. For hours we waited, prayed, hoped. Then a doctor entered the waiting room. The expression on his face told me everything. George didn't survive. The loss devastated all of us, especially Linda. After losing her son, she had now lost her husband too. The grief nearly broke her. And honestly, it nearly broke me too. Because George wasn't just my father-in-law anymore. He was the father figure my own father had never been. The man who showed up when I needed help. The man who loved my boys without conditions. The man who stepped into a role nobody else wanted. At his funeral, something happened that made everything worse. My parents attended. Jessica attended. And somehow, they still found a way to make the day about themselves. During the reception afterward, I overheard my mother talking to distant relatives. Her words stopped me cold. Emily's situation is unfortunate. The relative nodded sympathetically. Then Mom added, she always struggles. Because she depends too much on other people. I felt physically sick. Depend too much on other people? The woman who threw me out was criticizing me for accepting help? The hypocrisy was unbelievable. Yet nobody challenged her. Nobody knew the truth. At least not yet. As I stood there listening, Linda appeared beside me. She had heard it too. Her eyes filled with disappointment. Not anger. Disappointment. The kind that comes from finally seeing someone's true character. Then she squeezed my hand and whispered, George knew exactly who you were. I looked at her. She smiled sadly. And he was proud of you. I nearly cried. Because those were words I'd spent my entire life wanting to hear from my own father. A few weeks later, while sorting through George's office, we discovered something unexpected. A locked metal box. Inside were business records, property documents, investment files, things neither Linda nor I knew existed. George had been working on something, building something, quietly, carefully, for years. At first, it looked ordinary. Then I noticed one file, a single folder with my name written across the front. My pulse quickened. Confused, I opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. And after reading the first sentence, my entire body went numb. Because George had been planning something for me long before he died. Something enormous. Something that could completely change the future of my twins. And at the bottom of the note was a sentence that left me speechless. A sentence that would start a chain of events nobody in my family saw coming. It read, if you're reading this, then it's time for you to know what Ryan and I never told anyone. For nearly an hour, I sat alone in George's office staring at the folder with my name on it. My hands were shaking. Not because I expected money. Not because I expected some hidden inheritance. But because George wasn't the kind of man who left unnecessary surprises. Everything he did had a purpose. Everything. I looked over at Linda. She was sitting quietly across the room. Still grieving. Still exhausted. Yet somehow she managed a small smile. Open it. I took a deep breath. Then unfolded the letter. The moment I saw George's handwriting, tears filled my eyes. It felt like hearing his voice again. The first few lines were simple, personal.
He talked about Ryan.
About family. About the twins. Then I reached the sentence that changed everything. Emily, if you're reading this, then Ryan and I are no longer here to explain what we've been building. I frowned. Building? What did that mean? I kept reading. And suddenly my heart started racing. Years earlier, George and Ryan had purchased a struggling horse property outside town. Not as a business. As a dream. The property had been nearly worthless. Old fences. Broken barns.
Poor soil.
Most people considered it a bad investment. But Ryan loved horses. Always had. According to George, they spent years improving the land. Expanding it. Slowly acquiring neighboring acreage whenever opportunities appeared. What shocked me wasn't the property itself. It was what came next. The final page included ownership records. My name appeared beside theirs. I blinked. Then looked again. There had to be some mistake. But there wasn't. Years ago, Ryan and George had quietly added me as a partner. Without ever telling me. My eyes widened. Linda. She looked confused.
What?
I handed her the paperwork. A few seconds later, she gasped. Oh my God. The ranch, wasn't worth millions. Not even close. At least not then. But it was worth something. And more importantly, it was mine. Partly mine. For the first time since Ryan died, I felt something dangerous.
Hope.
The next several weeks became a blur. I visited the ranch constantly. The property needed work. Lots of work. The fences were falling apart. The barns needed repairs. The equipment was outdated. Financially, it made no sense. Emotionally, it meant everything. Because every corner of that property contained Ryan's fingerprints. His dreams. His plans. His future. A future he'd never get to see. One afternoon, while walking through the main pasture, I found an old notebook buried inside a desk drawer. It belonged to Ryan. Inside were pages filled with ideas, expansion plans, breeding programs, training facilities, business projections. I sat in the dusty office reading for hours, laughing, crying, remembering. Then I noticed something remarkable. Ryan's projections weren't unrealistic. In fact, they were surprisingly smart. The horse industry was changing. High-end training facilities were growing rapidly. Luxury equestrian properties were becoming increasingly valuable. Ryan had seen it years before most people. And suddenly, for the first time, I wondered, what if this dream could actually work? The idea terrified me, because everyone already thought I was a failure. My parents, Jessica, most relatives. They expected me to struggle forever. Expected me to depend on others forever. What would they say if I invested everything into a horse ranch? The answer came quickly. They laughed. A month later, I attended a family barbecue, a mistake I would soon regret. At first, everything seemed normal. Then Jessica asked what I'd been doing lately. I made the mistake of answering honestly. I've been working on the ranch. Jessica smirked. What ranch? I explained. Briefly. The room became quiet. Then she laughed. Not just her. Several relatives joined her. My father shook his head. Mom looked embarrassed. Jessica couldn't stop smiling. A horse ranch. She actually snorted. Emily, you're serious? Heat rushed into my face. Yes. Jessica looked around the table. Does anyone else hear this? A few people chuckled. Then she delivered the line she'd clearly been waiting to say. First, she couldn't support herself. More laughter. Now she's trying to become a cowgirl. The table erupted. Everyone except me. Everyone except Linda. The humiliation was immediate, painful, familiar.
I should have been used to it by then.
But it still hurt, because these people never wanted me to succeed. They needed me to fail. Needed me to remain the struggling widow. Needed me to stay beneath Jessica. Then my father spoke. Emily, be realistic. I looked at him. What does that mean? It means ranches don't magically become successful. The irony almost made me laugh. Nobody believed in me. Not one person. Except Linda. On the drive home, she reached over and squeezed my hand. They're wrong. I smiled weakly. I hope so.
No.
Her voice became firm. I know so. Those words stayed with me. For years. And eventually they became true. The next 5 years changed everything. I worked harder than I ever had in my life. 7-day weeks. Long nights. Endless setbacks. Financial scares. Repairs. Loans. Stress. Some months I thought I would lose everything. But slowly, painfully slowly, the ranch grew. We started offering horse training, then boarding services, then breeding programs. Every profit went back into expansion. The twins grew alongside the business. Noah loved the horses. Ethan loved the equipment. The ranch became our life, our home, our future. Then something unexpected happened. A wealthy investor visited. At first I assumed he was just another customer. But after touring the property, he requested a meeting. A private meeting.
His proposal shocked me.
He wanted to partner, expand, develop additional facilities. The offer was enormous, far beyond anything I'd imagined. And suddenly the struggling ranch Ryan dreamed about wasn't struggling anymore. News spread quickly. Local newspapers covered our growth. Industry publications noticed. Investors called. Developers called. Everyone suddenly wanted a piece of something they'd once ignored, including my family. The same family that laughed. The same family that mocked me. The same family that threw me away. My phone started ringing.
Mom, Dad,
Jessica.
aunts.
Uncles. Cousins. People who hadn't cared about me for years suddenly cared very much. At first it felt ridiculous. Then it became suspicious. Especially Jessica. She called constantly, texted constantly, acted friendlier than she'd ever been, which meant she wanted something. The question was what? I got my answer 6 months later. Because during a routine review of old property records, my attorney discovered something hidden deep inside the ranch's history. A document, an agreement, a transfer, one signature, one secret. And that secret connected directly to my parents, directly to Jessica, and directly to the reason they suddenly wanted back into my life. When my attorney explained what he'd found, I nearly dropped the phone. Because if the documents were accurate, then my parents had been hiding something from me for more than 20 years. Something worth millions. And they were about to realize I knew the truth. The ballroom was packed. More than 300 people filled the room. Investors, business partners, industry leaders, local officials, reporters, friends, employees, and of course my family. The same family that once laughed when I talked about saving the ranch. The same family that told me I would fail. The same family that shut the door in my face while I stood in the rain holding 2 newborn babies. Now they sat in the front row, smiling, pretending, waiting. Especially Jessica. She looked happier than I'd seen her in years. Because she believed she had won. She believed the ranch sale would make her wealthy. She believed the documents my parents had hidden for decades guaranteed her a share of everything. What she didn't know was that my legal team had spent the last 6 months uncovering every detail of the truth. And the truth was about to destroy her plans. As guests settled into their seats, my attorney leaned toward me. Ready? I took a deep breath. Not because I was nervous about the money. Because I was nervous about the confrontation. For years I'd avoided conflict, avoided revenge, avoided public humiliation. But today wasn't about revenge. Today was about truth. And truth has a way of making guilty people uncomfortable. The event began with speeches. Investors discussed growth. Partners discussed expansion. Reporters took notes. Everything appeared normal. Then the final presentation started. The one everyone had come to see. The acquisition agreement. The deal that valued our ranch at more than $120 million. A giant screen illuminated behind the stage. The room erupted into applause. I glanced toward my family. Jessica was already smiling. Dad looked proud. Mom looked relieved. It made me sick. Because none of them had earned that moment.
Not one.
The moderator stepped forward. Before we finalize today's acquisition, Ms. Carter has requested a few remarks. The audience applauded politely. I stood, walked toward the microphone, and looked out across hundreds of faces. For a moment, memories flooded my mind.
Ryan, George,
Linda, the twins, the rain, the closed door, the years of struggle, everything. Then I began speaking. When my husband died, I thought my life was over. The room became quiet, very quiet. I continued. I was 27 years old. I glanced toward Noah and Ethan, now 11 years old, sitting proudly beside Linda. I had newborn twins. My voice trembled. And nowhere to go. Many people nodded sympathetically. Then I looked directly at my parents. The room didn't notice, but they did. Immediately. When I asked my family for help, I learned something important.
Silence.
Being related by blood doesn't always make someone family. My mother's smile vanished. Jessica shifted uncomfortably. Dad crossed his arms. The audience listened carefully. I continued. Family is the people who show up when you have nothing. Then I pointed toward Linda. The crowd applauded. Linda immediately started crying.
So did I.
Because without her, none of this would have happened. Nothing. After the applause ended, I took another breath. Then I said something nobody expected. Today isn't actually about a business sale. Confused murmurs spread through the room. I looked toward my attorney. He nodded. The giant screen behind me changed. Suddenly, legal documents appeared. Property records, trust agreements, transfer records. My parents froze. Jessica's face drained of color, because she recognized the documents immediately.
And so did they.
The room grew silent. What you're looking at, I explained, is evidence of a secret that remained hidden for more than 20 years. Whispers erupted. Journalists immediately started writing. My mother looked terrified. Dad looked furious. Jessica looked confused. Then I revealed everything. How my grandparents had established a small family investment trust years earlier. How the trust was supposed to benefit both daughters equally. How my parents quietly redirected resources almost exclusively toward Jessica.
Cars.
College tuition. Business bailouts. Debt payments. Luxury vacations. Years of financial favoritism. The audience sat stunned. Then came the shocking revelation. The one my attorney had uncovered. A hidden transfer agreement. Signed years ago. One that my parents believed would give Jessica ownership rights in any major family asset I developed, including the ranch. They had secretly planned it decades earlier. Without telling me. Without my consent. Without my knowledge. The room erupted.
Gasps.
Whispers.
Shock.
Several reporters immediately stood. Questions started flying. Jessica looked horrified. Because for the first time in her life, people weren't admiring her. They were judging her. Then my attorney approached the stage. He addressed the crowd.
Calmly.
Professionally. And delivered the final blow. The agreement is legally invalid. The room froze.
Dad's eyes widened.
Mom looked like she might faint. Jessica stared in disbelief. My attorney continued. It was improperly executed and unenforceable. More whispers. More shock. Then he smiled slightly. Which means Ms. Carter remains sole owner. Thunderous applause erupted. Jessica's entire future had just collapsed. Not because I took anything from her. Because she was never entitled to it. The difference mattered. A lot. Then something happened I didn't expect. Jessica stood, publicly, in front of everyone, and completely lost control. This isn't fair. The room fell silent.
She pointed at me.
You got everything. For a second, nobody moved. Then I answered calmly.
No.
I looked directly into her eyes. I built everything. The words hit harder than shouting ever could. Because they were true. Every fence. Every loan. Every sleepless night. Every sacrifice. Every risk. I built it. Not my parents. Not Jessica.
Me.
The room erupted into applause again. Jessica sat down, defeated. For the first time in her life, nobody rescued her. Nobody defended her. Nobody sided with her. The truth was too obvious. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The acquisition executives walked onto the stage. A photographer followed. The ceremonial check appeared. $120 million. The applause inside the ballroom lasted nearly a full minute. 300 people stood on their feet. Investors, business leaders, employees,
friends,
reporters. Everyone was celebrating. Everyone except the three people sitting silently in the front row. My mother, my father, and Jessica. The same people who had closed their door on me 11 years earlier. The same people who watched me struggle after Ryan died. The same people who laughed when I told them I was trying to save the ranch. Now they sat frozen while a giant screen behind me displayed a number none of them could ignore. $120 million. Not promised. Not estimated. Not potential.
Real. Signed.
Final. The sale was complete. And suddenly every excuse they'd ever made disappeared. Because the daughter they called a burden had built something extraordinary. The daughter they abandoned had become the family's greatest success story. As people crowded around me offering congratulations, I noticed my mother quietly crying. At first I felt nothing. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Just emptiness. Because there are some wounds that success doesn't erase. Money doesn't erase standing in the rain with newborn babies. Money doesn't erase begging your parents for help. Money doesn't erase hearing a door slam behind you. Some scars stay forever. Eventually the crowd began to thin. One by one, guests left. Soon only family remained. The silence became uncomfortable. Then my mother slowly walked toward me. For the first time in my life, she looked small. Not physically. Emotionally. Like someone who had finally realized the consequences of her own choices. She stopped a few feet away. Her voice barely worked. Emily. I waited. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I'm sorry. For years I dreamed about hearing those words. For years I imagined how satisfying it would feel. But standing there I realized something surprising. The apology didn't erase anything. It couldn't. Too much had happened. Too many years had passed. My mother continued crying. We should have helped you. My father stepped beside her. His eyes were red. I should have helped you. That hurt even more. Because my father almost never admitted fault. Not once in my childhood. Not once in my adult life. Yet now he couldn't even look me in the eyes. I failed you. The words hung in the air. Heavy. Painful.
Real.
Then something happened that nobody expected. Jessica stood up. For years she had always been confident. Always arrogant. Always certain she was better than me. Now she looked broken. Completely broken. She walked toward me. And suddenly burst into tears. Not polite tears. Not dramatic tears. Real tears. The kind that come from years of guilt finally exploding. I hated you. The room went silent. Even my parents looked shocked. Jessica wiped her face. I hated how happy you were. I frowned. Happy? After everything? She nodded. As crazy as it sounds, I was jealous. I stared at her. She laughed bitterly. You had Ryan. My chest tightened instantly. Jessica looked down. He loved you the way nobody ever loved me. The room became silent. For years I thought Jessica was cruel because she felt superior. Now I realized part of her cruelty came from insecurity. That didn't excuse what she did, but it explained it. Then she whispered something that broke my heart. I spent my entire life competing with you. Another tear rolled down her face. And you never even knew we were competing. For the first time, I saw my sister clearly, not as the favorite child, not as the villain, as someone damaged by the same family that damaged me, just in a different way. Then came the moment nobody was prepared for. My sons approached. Noah and Ethan, the babies who had been in my arms that rainy afternoon. Now they were 11 years old, strong, smart,
Kind.
the kind of boys Ryan would have adored. My mother stared at them and completely fell apart because she finally understood what she'd missed. 11 years of birthdays, 11 years of Christmas mornings, 11 years of baseball games, school events, family memories, thousands of moments, gone forever. Not because I kept the boys away, because she never showed up. Then Ethan asked quietly, Grandma? My mother looked up. Hope flickered across her face. Tiny, fragile, but real. Ethan swallowed. Why didn't you help Mom? The room froze. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. My mother began crying harder than ever because there was no good answer, no excuse, no justification, just truth. Finally, she whispered, "Because I thought I was right." Silence. Then she added, "And I was wrong." Those 5 words hit harder than anything else that day, because they were honest, maybe for the first time. Months later, life slowly began healing. Not fixing. Healing. There's a difference. Trust didn't magically return. Relationships didn't suddenly become perfect. But people tried. For the first time, they tried. My parents attended the boys' games. Jessica started therapy. Family dinners became possible again. Awkward sometimes. Emotional often. But possible. And that's more than I ever expected. The greatest moment came 1 year later. The foundation Ryan and George inspired officially helped its 100th family. 100 families. 100 mothers. 100 fathers. 100 children. People who had been standing exactly where I once stood.
Scared.
Alone. Desperate. As I looked across that room, I realized something. The greatest victory wasn't the ranch. It wasn't the money. It wasn't the $120 million. The greatest victory was turning pain into purpose. Because if my parents had never rejected me, I might never have discovered my own strength. If that door had never closed, I might never have walked toward the life waiting for me. And that's the lesson I carry today. The people who abandon you do not decide your future. They only reveal their character. Your future is decided by what you do next.
Keep going. Keep building. Keep believing.
Because one day the same people who doubted you may watch you succeed beyond their imagination. And when that day comes, you won't need revenge. The truth will speak for itself.